Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns and welcome once again to another edition of Sound Off Louisiana. I hope everyone's had a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we are starting this year off as the first Sound Off feature that we've had guests, and that's the reason the Sound Off Louisiana blog was formed in the first place, is to let people sound off. And it's my distinct honor today to have with me Miss Kimberly Burbank and Mr. Ron Wright. Now, Miss Burbank is going to bring our viewers up to speed on a situation involving her uncle, who was recently convicted of a murder, and she has some concerns about Louisiana State Police and also the Baton Rouge City Police, and some concerns that she has about the lack of investigation of things that are of concern to them. So with that, I'm going to have you just, if you will, just tell, just like you did when you first contacted me about 5 weeks ago, and kind of bring everybody up to speed. So the floor is all yours, Ms. Burbank.
Thank you for the opportunity. East Baton Rouge Parish has a sincere need to decrease crime. That interest has to be met with actually identifying perpetrators of crime, people that do crime. There seems to be an interest by the District Attorney Hillar, by Chief Police Murphy Powell, and even by Colonel Lamar to simply convict, but not to actually find people that are committing crimes. So maybe that's why crime has not decreased, because the people committing crimes are not being caught. What has been happening are people are being profiled based on previous convictions, and there's minimal investigation. And so the first thing that I would like to share with Louisiana citizens is that in our situation, we have a family member. His name is Kim Powell. There's a case, it's called Louisiana, State of Louisiana versus Kim Powell. In 2020, there was a woman named Miss Courtney Lee. She was found shot in the head twice, and she was burned. Her body was burned and being burned in a wooded area. When the Louisiana Crime Lab received the evidence from this wooded area, they found receipts. However, no one at East Baton Rouge, under Chief Murphy Powell's leadership, investigated the receipts. There were 3 receipts found 10 feet from her body. They were from New Orleans. They had a name on them, Juan Santos. No one investigated the debit card. No one went to the Pizza Hut. These receipts were within 1 to 2 weeks of her body being found, but they were 10 feet from her body. They were collected by people that work in public service, but they weren't investigated. The second piece is that there was DNA taken. DNA was taken from her, Courtney Lee's, ankle, and was also taken from her womb. When they tested Kim Powell, he was found negative.
Oh.
2 years later, a week before Kim Powell went to trial, I would call this a lynching.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because it's hard to say that, but it's true. You have 2 African Americans. You have Colonel Lamar Davis, who's African American. Mm-hmm. You have Police Chief Murphy Powell, who's African American. Mm-hmm. However, they're using a true allele DNA test that is really a genetic test. So if you're in the area, basically it simply says that anyone with the same Y male chromosome, meaning anyone within your lineage. So if it could be my brother, my brother's son, my brother's uncle, my brother's father, my brother's cousin, my brother's uncle's son, that Y male chromosome follows. Fortunately, Miss Stacy Williams was very honest. She works for the Louisiana Crime Lab. Okay. She honestly testified that there was a 1/100000th of a percentage of a probability between Mr. Kim Powell and Courtney Lee. She was also asked whether or not that same test would be proven for any of Mr. Kim Powell's family members following their Y male chromosome. Miss Stacy Williams honestly testified yes. But this was placed in front of a jury, maybe not as familiar with DNA tests. But one of the questions that our attorney asked Ms. Williams was, are you certified in true allele? She honestly answered, I've taken the test. Okay. He asked her, and he then asked the judge, Fred Kafasi, At this time, I would like to say that she is not fit to be a expert witness. The judge allowed it. And then she went on to explain the percentage of tests between whites, blacks, Hispanics, a genetic test. She explained that there were 4 to 5 other cases in Louisiana that had a true allele DNA test done. We have since, as a family, called True Allele. We have sent emails to True Allele. They are not responsive in explaining what the results from the Louisiana Crime Lab actually mean. We then had our attorney, Timothy Yazbek, send a public records request simply asking for the Louisiana Crime Lab to provide Ms. Stacy Williams' certification in True Allele. They have not. They responded 3 times. The first 2 times they provided evidence that we already had. On the 3rd time, when they were asked again with a highlight to that letter, public records request, they actually did not follow the Louisiana Public Information Act and have basically responded and said that they have responded to our request and gave us a copy of Ms. Stacy Williams' supervisor, Mr. Rhainney Simmons. They provided a copy of his email to the prosecutor, District Attorney Melissa Morvant. District Attorney Melissa Morvant, her famous quote is, "I want to put this behind me." In the few times that I've unfortunately had to sit in court and watch this case against my uncle, Mr. Kim Powell, who is innocent, she says that often. Whatever case she's speaking to, "I want to put this behind me, Your Honor, Judge, I want to put this behind me." We're in a parish that's simply convicting people without proper investigations. With the education that Ms. Melissa Morvant has, I would assume the education that District Attorney Dana Cummings has, it's an insult to higher education, because the questions that have come up in this case that lack evidence and how they have seen the lack of evidence and have steered juries, it's unfortunate, and I do believe it is why we continue to have crime. We're not actually finding criminals. We're just making convictions. And so that is what I would say about the Louisiana Crime Lab. There's a second piece to this, and that's the ballistic report. When my uncle Kim Powell was first arrested, the media reported that they found a murder weapon, which was incorrect. The media should report accurately. They found a weapon. Mm-hmm. When that weapon was found and tested, there was no DNA on the weapon. When my uncle was arrested, he was arrested at a convenience store. The gun was found in his house. There were other people in his house. He was not arrested at his house. When they took the gun, they tested it for the bullets that were found in Miss Courtney Lee, the victims that were taken from her head, and basically some were fragments. Louisiana Crime Lab employee, Mr. Rusty Day, said he submitted a report. It's about 2 to 3 pages. Mr. Rusty Day has no photographs of his case filings, just his report, just him writing what he believes to be a report. However, his report says that the test fires were, in one case, too small to actually come up with a result, that it was inconclusive. Okay. The other thing that Mr. Rusty Day said was that the other bullet came from the same classification of the gun that was found in my uncle's home. The same classification. There's several guns within that particular classification. When our attorney Timothy Yazbek asked him those questions, he answered honestly. When he was cross-examined by attorney Dana Cummings, she vehemently stood up. She pointed her finger at the gun and she said, "Did this bullet come from this gun?" And then Mr. Rusty Day said, no. Actually, she said, "Did this bullet 100% come from this gun?" And then he said, "Yes." So, what does a jury, district attorneys, presenting information, cross-examining their own witnesses, who have answered questions and then badger them into answering a question. And these other state employees ask the question or answer the question, yes.
Well, was there an opportunity for the defense attorney to point out the inconsistency between the 100% certainty of it having come from that gun versus just being in the classification of guns? Was that was the defense attorney?
So when the information was presented, this is something that I would love to see change. Defense attorneys are allowed pretty much one time to speak. So when they examine and ask their questions, they ask their questions. And they were able to get from him the fact that Mr. Russell used a different manufactured bullets to test fire. He was able to get out of Mr. Russell that he did use a different size bullet from the bullets that were found at the scene, which are not things you would expect when the bullets that you have, you could simply use the same weight bullet and you could simply use the same manufactured bullet. But he was able to ask him those questions. He basically hammered down that it was an inconclusive reporting. When Ms. Dana Cummings came back around to ask, she hammered down what she wanted him to say. And that is, make it definitive. Did these bullets come from this gun? Yes. So now you have a jury looking at someone telling them, who's a state paid employee with the Louisiana Crime Lab, testifying something opposite his own report with no photographs or any documentation to even support his own report. So those are the things that we find as a major issue with the Louisiana Crime Lab. We point them out because it's an opportunity for those employees and for the staff to improve and to not be focused on a conviction, but on fact, on justice, on finding the actual perpetrator. And
just to let our viewing audience know, we're going to provide a direct link to the complaints that have been filed so that you can look and see quite in depth, because it's not something that was just thrown together in a few minutes time on a napkin. It's very thorough. So we're going to provide a direct link for any of our viewing audience to take a look at the documentation that you've supplied that are of great concern to you. So you're doing fantastic. You're doing a great job. You're exemplifying why this blog was founded. Obviously, you have serious concerns about the way this whole trial went down. How long did the trial last?
3 days.
3 days. Okay. How long was the jury out in making its deliberations?
About maybe 3 hours.
About 3 hours.
About 3 hours. What can you give us an idea of the composition of the jury in terms of breakdown, racial and gender?
Sure.
Approximate.
So the jury of 14 were, just in case, 12 of them, I would say one was an African-American male. Uncle Kim Powell is an African male. I would say the majority were white female, and then you had a few African-American females. We were surprised by what the jury found. We walked out and my dad says, this tells you a lot about society. Right?
Exactly.
So,
well, for me, it was a reflection of if you look at the population of Baton Rouge, and then you look at what the jury was made up of, there seems to be an imbalance there. I don't know if that's intentional or not, or coincidental, but it seemed significant in the verdict. We actually left the jury, the courthouse, feeling that the prosecution really had no case. We were pretty confident in that. So you can imagine how basically shocked we were at the jury. The fact that they came back so soon, I thought that meant that it didn't take them long to deliberate.
You were looking for an acquittal.
Exactly. And it was just the opposite. And I don't know what plays into the minds of the jury. Obviously, they took put a lot of credibility into the expert witness, quote unquote, expert witnesses from the prosecution side. I think that played a large part in it because they perceive these people as being experts and being honest and professional in what they do. and they wouldn't question that. If I were on the jury, I probably wouldn't question either. I would make assumptions about the credibility of those representing the state, and obviously that would be a mistake.
Yes.
And that crime lab that you've referenced, that is a division within Louisiana State Police, or?
Yes. So Louisiana Crime Lab actually falls under the jurisdiction of the Louisiana State Police. My dad made an excellent point. You have state employees sitting in front of you as a citizen, giving you information. And honestly, they were all honest, except Rusty Day. He literally committed perjury. You just need a transcript. Beyond Mr. Rusty Day, I do understand the culture. I can gather from sitting and experiencing it what it's like to say that you have a colleague, someone that he probably has seen many times. Ms. Dana Cummings, Ms. Alyssa Morvant, they're a team. We're doing the work, we're doing the investigation. You call us up several times a year to ask us questions. Obviously, you're looking for, again, a conviction. So now you've asked me a question. Did this 100% come from his gun? Yes. But that's not what your report says.
Okay.
Again, I said before about Ms. Stacy Williams, I appreciate her honesty. The question now for Louisiana Supreme Court is, what is true allele? And are we using genetic tests, or are we using a test that actually demonstrates a person was present? Because there's a difference between genetics and presence. This person had to have been there. It was said during the trial that the Louisiana Crime Lab uses so many nanograms. They don't go below that. But now they're using picograms. But has that been approved? Do they have a policy that has now changed to allow it? And even if you have, why don't we have certified people administering the tests? Because Ms. Williams was honest and said, I haven't gotten my results back yet. Why do you have security access? Why do you have administrative access? You have login password to a test that you honestly say, I haven't got my results back yet. So that's a major administrative problem. I believe that Louisiana Crime Lab should immediately fix. It shouldn't take forever. It should be an immediate fix. We definitely feel that it affects my Uncle Kim Powell's defense. We felt that those were all things that came up in front of the jury that persuaded them to say, we're anti-crime. And then we've seen these several people here, that there was other people that came up too. And those other people, we can speak to those. I think that there was the ballistic report, the DNA report, phone records. The district attorney's office hired an expert witness to speak on phone records. The man honestly showed radiuses of blue and red dots. Kim Powell lived in the Dixie neighborhood. Miss Courtney Lee lived in the Dixie neighborhood. They should have phone records that somewhat mirror each other because they're using the same towers. The expert honestly said there are times where these phones are traveling in the same direction. Our defense attorney explained and asked, can you say that they are together? No. Do you have any phone messages, any text messages between the two of them? No. Any phone calls between the two of them at any given time, ever? No. Not sure why I'm not sure why the blue and red radiuses were ever shown. It seemed, it was very, I try to stay away from theatrics. But what I felt I saw between Ms. Dana Cummings and Ms. Melissa Morvant was theatrics. A bunch of postal boards of nothing. A bunch of blue and red dots of people living in the same neighborhood, never proving that they're together. But you can steer a person. If I show you something over and over again, if I spend an hour and a half, we would look at each other, our family members, and say, where are we going with this? Nowhere. But you've taken 2 hours of my life to show me all of this. And if you keep doing that, you can actually make a person. There's several studies to say this. You can make your person think. You've shown that all of this for 3 days must have meant something.
It has to be. Yeah, it's so important.
Nothing.
What appears to be evidence actually isn't evidence, but it appears because it's being presented by the state. That the human mind, us as individuals, make assumptions that if it wasn't valid or wasn't supportive of the prosecution's case, it wouldn't be presented. So it must be evidence. It must be something that helps to prove the prosecution's case. When in fact, if you really sit back and look at it, it doesn't at all.
Not even really.
During this feature, there's several times I would have liked to chime in about state police, but the past features speak for themselves. So I will be curious to see, have you gotten any reply back on the complaints that were filed with?
Thank you for asking. No. We followed up so what we learned is that although our family submitted the 13-page letter of complaint to both entities, East Baton Rouge Police Department, Louisiana Crime Lab, that the complaint has to come from Kim Powell. Kim Powell is incarcerated in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. So what we did was we sent him the copy and had him to sign it. To get him to sign it, we had to get, at this time in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, there's a due process problem. That's a whole nother conversation. They're not giving inmates access to due process. They cannot receive mail. So with that being said, luckily, thankfully, there was a supervisor there of the mailroom. I was able to speak to him. He allowed Kim Powell to sign. So we were able to get a signature from Kim Powell that then went as an original to East Baton Rouge Police Department.
Okay.
We followed up verbally through a phone call called Internal Affairs. It's addressed to Internal Affairs. The gentleman on the phone said it has to come from the person that's alleging the complaint. I said, you told me to do that the last time. We made sure it came from the person alleging the complaint, who's in East Baton Rouge prison, who's not allowed to get mail, but the mail supervisor allowed him to sign in the library. He said, okay. He said, well, he was found convicted. I said, yes, but is there anyone that we can speak to about these issues because of how the investigation was handled, because of things that were missed, because of how the arrest was done? My uncle was arrested before there was an arrest warrant. My uncle was arrested, his house was searched, his house was entered before there was a search warrant. So the gun should not even be evidence. There's timestamps. There's a video body cam from the policeman saying, we're moving too fast. This is police record. It's there. Judge Fred Kafasi watched the tape 3 times. 3 times he watched the tape. He listened to the police and say, we're moving too fast. My Uncle Kim asked why they had him handcuffed sitting in the back seat of their car, police car. He said, what's going on? Could you call my probation officer? But you got people in my house. What's going on? He said, am I under arrest? He said, just wait. He said, well, man, wait a minute. What's going on? Am I under arrest? We're waiting on a warrant.
Okay.
We have a Louisiana Constitution. Judge Fred Kafasi asked the defense and the prosecutor to submit briefs. They submitted the briefs. 30 days later, he ruled Kim Powell was arrested at the convenience store. Only for Detective Brandon Boudreaux, who's no longer with East Baton Rouge Police Department, to testify Kim wasn't under arrest. He's in total conflict of what the judge is trying to do. So again, Assistant District Attorney Melissa Morvant, her favorite quote, I just want to put this behind me.
Wow.
We do too. But we would like it to be that my uncle and my dad's brother-in-law and that our family member who served time for a crime he previously committed, who has worked with the Equal Justice Initiative and literally sat on panels in DC to talk about juveniles not being sentenced to life without parole.
Which happened to him, right?
Which happened to him. He served 33 years for a rape conviction. He was sentenced at 15. My uncle became more independent than some of my cousins. He had his own car, he had his own apartment.
How long had he been out?
3 years.
Okay.
I know people, my uncle was not on subsidized housing. He was we're talking about a registered sex offender who can only live in certain areas, who became a brick mason, who was a painter, who lived in a crime-infested area because he is a registered sex offender, who made the friends that he made, but he did not kill Miss Courtney Lee. And we didn't talk about the victims associations, but there's a tape. There are 2 tapes by her boyfriend, Mr. Corey Dowers, where Corey explains how she just wasn't herself that day. And how she woke up and how he rode with himself and 2 of his friends, and he's pretty much the last person to have seen her. And then how he said he got to work and he hitched himself to a tree. He said he cuts trees. And while he was cutting that tree, he said something told him something ain't right. So he called her from his phone. He called her from Roro's phone. He called her from the boss's phone. The detective said, "Why'd you call her from the boss phone?" He said, "I just knew if I called her from the boss's phone, she'd answer the phone." She never called. He's doing all this calling, and she's not missing in the middle of the day. The detective said, "Well, what was the first time that you called her?" "I called her around 9:30 or so, something like that." The detective looked on his phone. He said, "You didn't call her, you called Tasha." He said, "You didn't call Courtney until after 5 o'clock. Her body was found before 5 o'clock, before 4 and 5. "What time did you get off work?" "About 3:30. "What time did you go to work?" "Around 9:30, 10 o'clock. So your narrative, there's some issues in your narrative. There's a friend, Mr. Dion Graves. He was a friend of Corey. He was a friend of Courtney. He's on tape. They said, "Well, we have to talk to you, Mr. Dion, because you're the last person that she talked to. So we have to just talk to. We got the guy. We got the guy. But we got the guy. We just need to talk to you." He said, what was your conversation about?" "Well, her and Corey had an argument." You said something at an argument. What was it about?" "Well, something came up missing. And so, she does have different people in the house. She do be having a lot of people in the house." And so, but it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't a big deal. "Oh, okay, all right, okay. What kind of person was she?" He started asking some other questions. Okay, so Dion's the last person to talk to her because she called him and she said, "I had an argument with my boyfriend, the father of my children, a man that also has a record for blunt force trauma to a woman in 2017 or 2016. So yes, you arrested. We understand why you arrested Kim Powell, because there was a black male on the camera. He's a black male. He has a car that was like the car that was coming out of the wooded area. When you showed him the picture of the car, he said, "Yeah, that's my car. That's my car." "Were you around such and such and such per day? Were you?" "Well, yeah, I was around. I was different places on Saturday. I was different places." Well, we're researching a body. Somebody was found over. Can you ask us a few more questions? "Well, I was coming here to listen, but you just said that you're investigating a murder. That's serious. I'm gonna need to get a lawyer. You investigate that something. Well, we just wanted to ask you a few more questions. I understand what you're saying, but that's something serious. You're talking about a murder. I need to talk to somebody." So when they talked to the woman that was with my uncle that day, Miss Samantha Washington, she was in the home when they found the gun. She said everything was the same. The car was the same. The house was the same. We were going to be going to New Orleans in a few days. Everything was the same. That's Samantha's story. That's her narrative. Corey's narrative is she just wasn't herself that morning. "I felt the need to call her from my phone, Roro's phone, from the boss's phone, all day." He said, "I called Tasha. I told Tasha, go looking for her. Well, when I got off work, Tasha picked me up. We rode around looking for her." You rode around looking for somebody that's not missing?
Hadn't been reported missing.
Samantha says everything was normal. That everything was the same. Corey says something just wasn't right. And you don't ask any more questions about the closest of kin. Dion said, well, they had that argument that morning, something went missing. That's all we have to say.
Well, and y'all have done a fantastic job. I want to compliment you on how well prepared you are. I knew that from when you first spoke with me about 5 or 6 weeks ago. So thank both of you for appearing today. And